And I can grab this off the city's page, the feed.
Mm-hmm. Just have to be careful with the audio so you don't get feedback.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Chamberlain, Deputy City Manager for the City of Kalamazoo, and we'd like to welcome everybody to the City of Kalamazoo's virtual town hall meeting tonight to discuss adult use or recreational marijuana, and also be able to try to answer some questions and to discuss next steps that the City of Kalamazoo will be following in our effort to create some new ordinances and procedures. The way this presentation will work this evening is there will be a brief presentation by our panelists, and there will also be an opportunity for questions and answers that we'll be taking through various means. So if you're listening tonight or you're watching, you can submit a question in the Facebook Live comment feature, or you can email them to Kalamazoo. You can email it to townhall@kalamazooCity.org. Again, that's all one word, townhall@kalamazooCity.org. Or you can send in a question to a voicemail box, and we will provide that to the panelists. The telephone number is area code 269-226-6573. And we will, at the end of the presentation here, we will be taking those questions as staff. We'll be compiling them and then giving those to the panelists so that they can answer them. So tonight I want to introduce who the panelists are. We have Kalamazoo City Planner, Christina Anderson. We also have the City of Kalamazoo's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director, Dorla Bonner. Also joining us here is City Attorney Clyde Robinson. And then we have City Commissioner Eric Cunningham, City Commissioner Chris Pradle, and also Kalamazoo Mayor David Anderson. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Kalamazoo Mayor Anderson.
Jeff, thank you so much for the introduction, and please pay attention to how you can get questions in. There'll be continuing information about that. So I once again, I just want to welcome everybody who's participating. I hope there's a lot of interested folks that will maybe watch it live, but also watch it later because it'll be available. And I want to give a little context. This is not a standard city commission meeting. This is a presentation style. So even though we are taking questions here, it's not a standard format where we'll be doing public comments in the same way that we would at a standard public city commission meeting. So once again, thank you to everybody who's participating, particularly Commissioner Pradle and Commissioner Cunningham here. And just before we get started on the work of the evening, I just want to provide a little context, and that is this. Excuse me. These are serious times, and obviously all of us are concerned, and we're every day thinking about what are we doing as it relates to COVID-19? What is our response here at the city? And the question might come up, well, why are you doing this in the light of all those other things that are happening? And I just want to say this, is that the city is still very focused on issues related to safety and services here in the city of Kalamazoo. We have entire department check-ins that happen 5 days a week, where everybody calls in, making sure all our departments are functioning, there's no problems. We're focused on safety of city staff and providing services to residents as we would were the virus not upending all of our lives. As everyone knows, we've done some special work lately. One was related to getting some money into this disaster relief fund. We took that action a couple of weeks ago. And then our small business loan fund, and I know we're already working hard getting money out the door with that. So that's the context. That's going on. The city itself does not have a health department. So we're not front center when it comes to the health side of things, but we have city staff that are participating with our Kalamazoo County Health Department. That's where public health responsibilities reside in the county, and we're definitely everyday partners with that team that's doing that work. So thanks to the county, shout out to Public Health Department there, to our Emergency Operations Center folks that are making sure all that's happening. But the work has to go on. And when I had a conversation, a couple long ones recently with Vice Mayor Griffin and with our commissioners, we just felt like we need to find a way to keep doing the work that we promised to do, that we were elected to do, and it's important for people in the city. And so here we are at our inaugural town hall approach to this. And this is going to be part of our outreach effort related to the work we're doing on adult use marijuana. So here we are. This is something that citizens of Michigan supported and passed, the opportunity for adult use marijuana businesses. There was certainly a majority of Kalamazoo city residents that voted for that at the state level, and have also voted in support of some local initiatives over the course of the last 2 years. So we know we have that support, and we know there's interest in Kalamazoo. So why are we here talking about this? It's because it is not a simple thing to do. This is, to some extent, a brand new world we are stepping in terms of a whole new business model. How does that work? What are the state rules that require us to do certain things? And what does the state allow us to do here as a home rule city in Michigan? To that end, we are going to have to do some zoning work, which requires ordinance changes. And that means it has to go to the Planning Commission first. That's zoning work. We have ordinance related to licensing that we'll need to pass at the city commission level. And we'll have a resolution that will accompany all that. So there's several pieces of work that have to come together to address the issue of how do we allow and support this brand new business model to exist and flourish here in the city of Kalamazoo. So that is our hope tonight, is to take those somewhat complicated issues that are multi-layered and simplify them as much as we can so that people can understand where they would desire to have some input. Ask some questions tonight. That's not the end of it. You'll still have an opportunity to keep asking questions, and we hope those will come in. So that's the task tonight. And we do have a planning commission meeting coming up. That's next week on April 15th. So things are moving along. That would be an opportunity for this zoning ordinance to initially go to the Planning Commission. So tonight we have our own team of city experts who've been working on this. We have City Planner Christine Anderson. We have Dorla Bonner here. We have City Attorney Clyde Robinson. And hopefully we will be able to talk about all those various components of what I mentioned here to help further the general awareness of what is the work that we're doing. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our City Planner, Christina Anderson, and we'll move through our cast of characters here and do the best we can with our experiment and this kind of interaction. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to everyone who is listening and tuning in with us this evening. Before we get started, I just want to remind you on how you can send us your questions and comments. And again, the email address is townhall, all one word, at kalamazooCity.org. You can also call and leave a voicemail for us at 269-226-6573. And if you're watching on Facebook this evening, you can put your question right into the comments on Facebook Live. So as Mayor Anderson mentioned, there are multiple pieces that need to be reviewed and approved in order for the city to fully opt into adult use marijuana businesses. And what we're going to be discussing tonight, or focusing most of our discussion on tonight, are the elements that focus on social equity and the zoning code itself. Again, as the mayor mentioned, we are moving through our review and approval timeline as was laid out before COVID kind of threw us all a little bit of a curveball, and we have a plan commission meeting that has been scheduled for next Wednesday to talk about the zoning and have the plan commission review it before it goes to city commission. And that's what we're going to start off with tonight, is a little information on the zoning ordinance piece. And then we'll move to the social equity. So first of all, with any business that is going to open in the city of Kalamazoo, it needs to be permitted in our zoning code, and adult use marijuana businesses are no different than any of those. So we need to incorporate them into our ordinance in order for businesses to open. The state of Michigan has provided cities with 10 different business or establishment types for adult use marijuana or recreational marijuana. The city of Kalamazoo is currently reviewing 8 of those to be included in the zoning code. And I'm going to break down what those are for you. So most of those mirror what the city already has permitted in their medical marijuana ordinance that was approved a couple of years ago. And so those establishments or those businesses are grower, so a business that grows the marijuana plants. Processor, business that processes it into product that then can be used. Safety compliance, which is essentially a laboratory, like a medical laboratory. Secure transporter, which is a business that can transport marijuana product between grower and processor and where it's sold. And then finally, the shop. And the state for medical marijuana referred to the entity that sold the product as a provisioning center. As relates to adult use or recreational marijuana, the state calls it a retailer. So if you hear, you may hear both of those terms, but they both sell the final product. And so those 5, again, which are incredibly similar to what we already allow in medical marijuana, are proposed for inclusion into our ordinance moving forward for adult use. The state provided cities with 5 new business types that did not exist for medical marijuana. The city of Kalamazoo is considering 3 of those for inclusion into our new ordinance. The first of those is a micro business. A micro business is kind of a one-stop shop kind of establishment. It allows small scale growing of marijuana plants, up to 150 plants. It allows processing within the same site of what is grown there, and allows sale of the product from what is grown and processed on site in that location. The second new type is what's called an excess grower. And what that is, it's a license that allows someone who is a grower to increase their capacity, so to be a very large growing facility. And the third one that is under consideration in the city of Kalamazoo is what's called a designated consumption lounge. And that's a commercial business that allows for the consumption of marijuana on site, but does not allow the sale of that product. And so those are of the new types, the 3 that the city is considering for inclusion into its zoning ordinance. Now, of all of those are being considered for commercial and manufacturing districts. These are not being considered for any residential zoning district. Just like any other use, when we bring it into the code, into the zoning code, we review it and figure out if it can be permitted by right or permitted with some special parameters to make sure that it fits into the location that it's going to. And we have a couple of different parameters that are we're proposing to be essentially universal for all of the for all of the 8 business types, with the exception of 1, the laboratory. The following applies. Wherever they are located, they must be at least, they must be 1,000 feet from a pre-existing K through 12 grades school, and 500 feet from a state licensed daycare facility. And so that again applies to everything but the safety compliance, the laboratory use. In addition to that, each of the uses has their own set of parameters. Some of them are distance between facilities to spread them out. Some of them have to do with operations being indoor or outdoor, but each was considered individually and looking at our medical marijuana ordinance, and the standards were put in that so they would best fit in with our community and the different locations. Now, I think it would be rather boring if I just listed for you each of the districts where everything is located. So what I'm going to do right now, before I turn it over to Commissioner Pradel, is let you know where you can get all of that information. So if you go on the city's website, which is www.kalamazoocity.org /adult use marijuana, adult use marijuana being all one word and marijuana spelled with an H. You can access not only the draft, what's being proposed in the zoning code, you can, from that site, you can get past presentations. This presentation will also be uploaded onto that site after today. And you can get a variety of information on this topic from that site. But the zoning code information is definitely there and allows you to look at each of the proposed establishments and where they're located. Commissioner Pradel, do you want to kind of add to that?
Sure. Thanks, Christina, and good evening, everybody who's watching. I hope you're taking good care of yourself and those in your household. Great to be here tonight with Commissioner Cunningham as well, and Mayor Anderson, who I know have both been very active in community dialogue and hearing from folks as well. So thank you guys for being here as well. So kind of just to piggyback off of what Christina was saying, the proposed zoning standards that Christina discussed were created based on quite a few things that the city was examining. And one is where existing medical marijuana businesses are permitted. Considerable feedback from the community, and especially from the meetings that we held in February. We've also received just countless email correspondence from citizens who care on both views of what we're doing, but even just as much as Commissioner Cunningham hosted a really great panel discussion and presentation, and had 40 or 50 people there as well. So that feedback has been coming in, and right up until the COVID closures. Just an exhaustive review of other city codes, and then also considering the social equity piece to Kalamazoo as well. So that's been some of the things to consider as well. Just from my view, it's been incredibly impressive, the amount of community interest and input that we received. Even up till yesterday, I received an email from somebody who had some pretty strong views on what we're working on. People have been willing to grab coffee, and it's been great at educating us. I mentioned Commissioner Cunningham's forum that he hosted, which was a great presentation and panel. And all the sessions that city staff has put on at City Hall, and all that has been incredibly useful. And so encourage people to continue to reach out to us and to the planning commissioners. And just a reminder that what's going to the planning commission is the zoning components, but remember there's also the licensing and the social equity pieces as well. So keeping that in mind as well. And then also I just wanted to share really quick the intent or reasoning behind what the proposed zoning that you can look up right now is. And one of them is allowing the marijuana uses in a wide variety of locations. And that's largely to prevent overinflated pricing, land pricing. And so that's a really important component that we're considering. Then also locating and managing existing medical marijuana uses and protected uses such as schools and daycares. And so you'll see some of that in there as well. And then also just the benefit of time, just so it gave the city the opportunity to just review what other cities are doing, to have more robust conversations internally and with the community. And so, that's really, why this is all happening. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Pradel. Christina, did you have anything else then? Okay. Door of Honor, are you up?
I think she's on mute. Can somebody unmute her?
Okay.
think they
All
got
right,
it.
can you hear me?
All right.
Great. Thank you. Again, my name is Dorla Bonner. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director for the City of Kalamazoo, and I've been charged with the responsibility of developing our state social equity plan. I mean, our local social equity plan for the adult use marijuana. The difference between the medical is that the state instituted a social equity requirement, and also the state has focused their social equity on the reduction of licensing fees. The state requires that all applicants who apply for a recreational adult use marijuana facility submit a social equity plan. And we at the city are following suit and developing a plan to meet our local needs and to impact our own community. Some of the things that we have added are considerations in zoning for locations, exceptions in zoning code for required separation between uses when tied to certain census tracts, and residents with drug conviction, Our goal with our social equity plan is not to just support people who have been impacted to start businesses, but also to have a community impact from the fees that we will receive from the licensing and from the state. We're also considering hiring requirements for entities that receive city support and contract values. If they receive more than $10,000 in some kind of contract support, whether the city gives you land or some kind of, whatever the arrangement is between an organization and the city, we're requiring that. We're not requiring, we're hoping and expecting you to hire local. We are also following the state's reductions on licensing fees. So this is something new. It is not just city driven, it is driven by the state, and we're following suit. And I wanted you to remember that you can send questions to townhall@kalamazoo.org if you're not clear on anything. We want to make sure that we're having a real dialogue and that we all leave here with a good understanding. And now Commissioner Cunningham is going to speak further to the social equity. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dorla. And so once again, I want to echo my colleague Chris Prados and the mayor's sentiments in regards to everyone. Please stay safe. Right now is a very interesting time that we live in, dealing with this virus that we are all at war with. So I pray blessings over all of you and safety in that nature. So yeah, let's go back to day one. So in 2018, we know that recreational marijuana was approved via a ballot initiative. When it was approved, it was also approved with an extra component, that component being social equity. Fast forward a little bit, June of 2019, around that time, the state came out with their legal guidelines, which required all municipalities to be opted in automatically come November of 2019. And then that brings it back to Kalamazoo. So instead of as a governing body, instead of us as commissioners automatically opting in, we put a postponement until June. We did that for a couple reasons. The first reason, it goes back to the zoning piece. Really trying to get a better understanding of where do we want this in our community, this opportunity. Do we want it all clustered in one location? Do we want to disperse throughout the community? Is there certain areas we want to make sure that we protect, things of that nature? The other component was the social equity piece. The social equity piece is very important and vital. One, we needed a little more time to study kind of what's going on with other municipalities, kind of see what's worked, what's not worked, and to make sure that we put together the most viable plan that we can that supports our community in the best way that we can. One of the things I really want to highlight just in that statement is, in all reality, we haven't seen an opportunity like this with the opportunity to bring in a complete new industry within our community like this in a very long time, to the degree that we have it right now. And I say that because in 100 years, when we look back, we'll look at and we'll be able to see what worked, what didn't work. So I think it's very vital that we not take a shotgun approach and just rush into this opportunity. And I think it's something that we have to be intentional on as a community and as a city governance and as city administration. And also the other piece that I want to speak to is the other piece that I want to speak to is the reason why Kalamazoo was even selected as a community that's been identified as being disproportionately impacted. I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about social equity, what does that mean? The definition that the state gave kind of identified its components. And so for us as a city governance, the thing that the administration has to do is ensure that they're within legal guidelines, within the law with each component of this ordinance that we'll eventually be passing. And one of the things that I really want to highlight is that me as a commissioner, I took heed or I took a high interest in this primarily for two reasons. One, obviously the social equity component, but ownership. If we want to impact these communities who have been negatively impacted, we want to bring some positive to that community. I think ownership and equity is the best equity way forward. As my colleagues mentioned, as the city administrative staff mentioned, we also want to make sure that that social equity piece impacts not only from an ownership standpoint, but the community at large. So those are some of the things that we are intentively paying attention to, some of the things that we're trying to make sure that we are doing the work in the background that needs to be done. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Ms. Christina Anderson once again to kind of give you some opportunities on engagement and kind of give you background on next steps.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. And thank you to Commissioner Pradel, Dorla Bonner, for providing some information tonight. We do have a next step. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think we're going to keep mentioning it because we really want to make sure that everyone knows and is able to participate with us. But on Wednesday, the zoning piece, and just the zoning piece, is going for review in front of the Planning Commission. That meeting starts at 7 p.m. It'll be a virtual meeting, and we'll be sharing information on how you're going to access that Zoom meeting and how public comment will occur. We'll try to keep it as close to the format of a normal Plan Commission meeting, just we won't all be in the same room. So please watch for that. And again, you can get that information on the city's website at kalamazoocity.org/adult use marijuana with an H. Information will be there about the Plan Commission meeting. So I will turn it over to the mayor for any final comments. But before I do, I just want to make sure, because we're going to enter into the question and answer portion of this activity this evening, that everyone knows how to send their comments and questions. So for one last time, it's townhall, all one word, at Kalamazoo City, also one word, .org. You can also call and leave a voicemail at 269-226-6573. If we run out of time tonight and we do not answer all the questions, we are going to be answering them all and posting them online. You can probably guess where. That is, again, that kalamazoocity.org/adult use marijuana page. And that's kind of our clearinghouse for all information. So if we don't get to your question, we will provide that answer online early next week. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Christina. Just first thing I want to say is that because this is a town hall style presentation, not a regular meeting, all the commissioners are not participating in this active way in the town hall. And that is just, clearly to make sure that we, based on our format, that we are not violating the Open Meetings Act. But I don't want anyone to assume that there is less interest from commissioners who are not participating in this particular town hall. I have the great benefit and pleasure of serving with 6 leaders on the city commission. including our Vice Mayor Griffin and the other commissioners who are not present on this, although I know some of them are actually experiencing this as people who are watching it and attending it, although they won't be actively participating. So I want to recognize the fact that all commissioners care deeply about this. And I think that's very important. So keep it in mind here is that we've got a lot of moving pieces. And some of those pieces have to go to other bodies first, like a zoning change. And the Planning Commission has to make their decision, and that will include comment. But when their decision is made, that is a decision of advice. They don't make the final decision. That recommendation comes to the City Commission. And since that is an ordinance to change zoning, it comes to the City Commission twice. There is a hearing, and then we have a first reading, we set our hearing date. So there are two opportunities for it to come to the City Commission in addition to the Planning Commission. That is the zoning piece. Keep in mind, though, that part of the zoning piece also includes some considerations attempting to address social equity. So even though we have this, Commissioner Cunningham talked about the social equity requirement that came with this statewide piece of legislation, we have more flexibility there to attempt to do a better job of addressing it here in terms of what pieces did not seem to do the best job they could, or how can we fill in the gaps with our local response to that. A piece of that is in our zoning. And then in addition to that, we will have our licensing ordinance piece and our and the resolution, so to speak, that goes along with that related to social equity. One thing I will say for a fact is that I don't think this is going to be perfect. We are using the best thinking we can to do the best job we can in real time with an ordinance that is coming to us in a starting less than perfect kind of a context, I would say. So we're going to try to do the best job we can getting this out the door here. And I will tell you here that it is an absolute priority to the best of our capacity for everyone on the commission that we do what we can as it relates to the social equity piece. So Commissioner Cunningham has definitely been leading the charge on that and is very focused on it. But I would say every individual who's on the commission is supporting his interest and desire and is committed to that themselves. So lots of pieces to come here. We did give ourselves a deadline of June. We're actually trying to the best of our ability to make that deadline. And but things can change. So at this point, we do have our city attorney available here who didn't participate in the presentation, but I guess I will go back lastly now and say thank you, Director Bonner, Planner Anderson, and City Attorney Robinson for being present. Jeff, do we have any questions?
Yes, Mayor, we do. And thank you very much. Actually, probably the most common question that we received so far, I think a number of you have touched on this topic, and I just want to see if you have anything else you want to add to it. And the question was, because the voters did approve this in the state of Michigan a couple of years ago, why hasn't the city of Kalamazoo yet allowed these businesses to open in the city of Kalamazoo? So I think Commissioner Cunningham, you touched on that topic quite extensively. Don't know if there's any more that you want to add to that, or if, again, kind of just reiterate what our timeline is here in April, May, and June.
Mary Anderson, do you want to talk about the timeline again quickly?
So keep it in mind that first of all, the state had to create some rules, and we were waiting for those rules to be created, and we waited quite a period of time. As a matter of fact, the final rules are still not created at the state. We're still operating under the emergency rules. I don't know if it's an emergency, but that's what they're called, the state emergency rules related to this. So the time when the state was actually going to start the process was last November, a few months ago. And we felt like, I would say reason one, we wanted to wait is we didn't want to rush into it and not do what we could on the social equity side. So that is one of the reasons Commissioner Cunningham brought this up. We wanted to be as thoughtful as we could about social equity. That is of primary importance to us. In addition, this is a brand new thing. Yes, we do have medical marijuana, but there's many new categories. This is going to be a new kind of business. Presumably, many more people will be interested in this business than the group of people who were taking advantage of marijuana for its medical attributes. So we wanted to make sure to be very thoughtful about that. Not sure if that fully answers the question. Commissioners or staff, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think what it is a commitment from one, highlight the importance of this opportunity coming into our community. The other component was a commitment as a city administration. One of the things that we've really honed in on in recent years is just making sure that we have that community engagement piece. So we wanted to make sure that we did those extra touches in regards to reaching out to the community to get some input. And then it really kind of goes back to, as Mayor mentioned, in regards to the zoning and then the social equity. And, you know, I believe our attorney, Clyde Robinson, probably can provide a little more context in regards to some of the thoughts behind that, if you want to chime in, Clyde.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think everybody's touched on the various reasons. The emergency rules weren't put in place in July of last year. It was after that that the state decided that initially 21, and then it jumped to 43 socially disproportionately impacted communities. Kalamazoo was identified, and the state was rolling out that plan as late as September and October of last year. And the state had 1 year from when the act became effective to start taking up to a year to take license. That the state took basically 11 months before it started accepting licenses. And with the social equity piece and the change in terms of our medical marijuana businesses were just coming online. In the fall of last year, I think we only had a handful of businesses that were up and running. And so we had no idea as to what kind of impact those businesses were going to place on the neighborhoods in which they were located. And it's interesting because we look at that as were marijuana dispensaries or provisioning centers, were they going to be a good neighbor like maybe a pharmacy would be, or are they going to be a neighbor that like a liquor store that may have some problems associated with it as in terms of an impact on a neighborhood? And provisioning centers and particularly processors and growers, there were issues with odor that we wanted to address. And interestingly enough, according to the state statistics, there's only about 3% of the state population that are registered caregivers and patients who could go to a medical provisioning center to receive the product. According to the state census, approximately 78.5% of the state population is age 21 and over. And that's the group of people who can go to the businesses that are selling adult use marijuana. So you're looking at a business that catered to maybe 3% of the population to a business that's going to potentially cater to up to 80% of the population. And that creates an entirely different dynamic in terms of traffic, in terms of some of the other effects that business may have on the surrounding neighborhood. And we wanted to look at that. And the other piece, and it's been stressed, the social equity. Kalamazoo is a social equity community, and we wanted to look at what can we do to make that a reality for our residents.
Just a quick look forward to when we're looking back and saying, why didn't something happen in November when it first could have? I understand that there's folks who desire the opportunity to be able to make their own local purchases here, and business people that are very interested in doing that work. What we did was a delayed opt-in so we can do the best job that we can on this. But that is also why we are now working, and we need everyone's help to make sure we get this done right. So if you have some input, don't wait around. Get this into us now so we can have an effective, community-approved ordinance that goes forward from this point. So looking forward here, June is not very far away to go through the steps we have to go through. So let's focus on looking forward, making this a great set of ordinances, and have it be a successful business for everyone who lives in Kalamazoo.
And Mayor, I might point out that in Michigan, there are approximately 1,470 cities, villages, townships that had to make that decision. And the vast majority have either said no, or they've said, we're going to wait and see. Out of that 1,470, there's only approximately 45 communities that have said we've opened for business for adult use marijuana. And a lot, as I said, a lot of them are taking a wait and see approach.
Thank you, Attorney
Thanks.
Robinson.
Commissioner Pradel, I think you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to mention too, just kind of thank individuals for their patience as well. I know that there are a number of individuals that have a lot on the line as business owners. Thank you guys for investing in our community, believing in our community, but also the people who are users who are, eagerly and patiently waiting for this to happen as well. I think most people know Kalamazoo is a very progressive community. And so for some people, especially users, the thought is that this delay, it doesn't necessarily align with that, but it very much aligns with our values and the values of us wanting to be thoughtful about this and make sure to consider that social equity piece. I would also say it's got to be, frustrating when you see communities like Bangor and Battle Creek and actually during the COVID crisis in Kalamazoo Township where people can purchase in other areas. But I keep saying this to folks who bring that up to me. Name one of those communities who have anything on us, so many different activities in our community, higher ed institutions, entertainment, one of the largest concentration of breweries, sports, all those different things that we have going for us. And so, we have a lot of great things going on for us. And I really believe that, and at the end of the day, that we're going to still be that shiny star on the map. So thanks for those who have been patient with us. So just wanted to share that.
So we do have some other questions, but along the lines of social equity, continuing on that thread, we had a question from Sandy from the email saying, by potentially allowing so many new facilities in the city, has it been considered that social equity applicants may not be profitable and are being set up to fail?
Dorla, would you like to take this question?
Sure. Thanks, Sandy, because you were speaking some of our thoughts. We've thought very carefully about how we can make sure that everybody is successful, especially the smaller groups entering the business. And because this is so new, there's no history. I posed that question with other folks and that are in the business and other communities, and we just don't know. Our goal is to watch this process and be as supportive as possible. The city has a business development process where we're supporting businesses. And so we just don't know. It's just too early to tell, but that is something that we've considered.
So adding to that, I think it's important to note that when we spoke with the community and about social equity and some of the barriers to entry into this business for potential entrepreneurs, lack of space and lack of places for the businesses to go was probably one of our #1 comments that we heard. And so, we took that information and, used that to help think about where we should put things and should we add these new license types. I think that one thing that is interesting to note, and you can see this really well on there's a presentation that's listed on that website, Adult Use Marijuana, that we put up that talks about of all the license types that, or establishment types that the state of Michigan gave us, some of them have restrictions such that you need to already be in the medical marijuana industry in order to to get an adult use marijuana license. And so we thought kind of long and hard about what ones don't fall into that category, which ones are open to a wider group of folks to give a greater opportunity. So we do allow 3 more establishment types than medical marijuana. Those ones that the state gave us, but it's also because, you know, they have different restrictions at the state level with who can get licenses, and we wanted to make sure that we were providing that variety for potential entrepreneurs.
Christina, I think that's a really good point. One thing to keep in mind here is that I think through the end of 21, if correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney Robinson, but there is that precondition that for the standard kinds of businesses outside of the micro businesses, that those are going to be associated with people who already have their medical marijuana license. So it's an interesting incongruity between this idea of social equity and the fact that we're really, you know, I'm not necessarily you know, contesting it, but we're basically saying for 2 years, you know, there is kind of a head start into this through the established medical marijuana industry. So how do we work with that 2-year head start and still give opportunities? I know that when we looked at our medical marijuana ordinance, we were thinking about things like, shall we limit the number of establishments? How do you manage that? How do you choose? If you make choices, are the people be unhappy and question how you made those choices? And really what we did with our medical marijuana ordinance and zoning ordinance was established parameters of distancing and zoning area designations, which actually created a natural limitation without coming up with a hard number. And also there was a little bit of a gamble in there, is that depending on where someone did locate, you know, that could also limit other people to be adjacent in the same zoning. So that also, even though some distance requirements have changed, that same, you know, application will occur, you know, even in our new districts as it relates to distancing and some of those requirements.
And I want to add that to what Mayor just said, that part of our social equity plan is to, during those 2 years when only medical manufacturers can have the privilege, we want to be working with the smaller providers to get them prepared when it opens up again, so they can enter into that larger scale of work. Because we knew that time frame, we knew that some folks wouldn't have the capacity or the financial backing to open it. It's a very expensive venture. But we knew we could, if folks wanted to do it, that they would need support in a lot of ways. So at the state level, they're providing, as part of their social equity plan, they're providing licensing support. And we're going to do the same thing, but not only licensing support, we want to help people understand the business, know how to grow the business, and know how to get into the larger aspects of the business during that 2-year time frame.
Chamberlain, can you repeat the question one more time for me?
That particular question, I think, was more along the general lines of just in social equity, what are the plans for the city on that? And also by allowing so many new businesses in the city, potentially, will some of them perhaps go out of business if we allow too many?
Got you. Yeah, I mean, so I want to send a special thank you to Banks and Company. Eric Foster worked with me about a month and a half ago to organize the forum. And the main reason why I organized the forum was because I was hearing a lot of misinformation, things in the community, such as there's not enough dollars to invest or things of that nature. And so first I want to highlight, and then I want to also highlight the difference between equity and equality. This piece of legislation was voted in regards to equity, not equality. The state defined its terms of equity versus equality, and a lot of their social equity guidelines kind of revolves around ownership. So when you inquire about that ownership piece, I think just to highlight again, the reason why we're taking our time in regards to jumping into this opportunity for our community is because we want to make sure, as Clyde mentioned, that that the individuals who are investing in this opportunity are good community partners, and individuals who actually get into this opportunity are those who were disproportionately impacted. And so speaking for Eric Cunningham, specifically, when you say disproportionately impacted, I mean, I'm just going to give it to you, frank, African Americans. Statistically, you can look at the data across the board, and that's what it reflects. So for me, a month and a half ago, you know, I kind of saw that's when I really started learning the writing is on the wall in regards to your question. In regards to, you know, if there are so many applicants that's coming in, how do we get to those who have been, you know, arrested or, you know, have these negative impacts from the industry on them? How do we ensure that they're at the table to be able to capitalize on this opportunity? And so that's really what the city has been focusing in on, is to try and find things within their abilities to reach that goal. And that's the reason why we are hosting this town hall, and specifically is so that everybody at the table can review all of this legislation that we're proposing and try to, you know, make amendments as best as possible. And to be quite frank and give you the reality of it is, in 2006, when affirmative action was turned down, that tied our hands today. With affirmative action, we would have been able to say, hey, you know, we're opening up, and just figuratively speaking, we're opening up 10 dispensaries, and out of those 10, 2 have to be African American. We can't do that legally. Or let me rephrase. We can do it, it'll just be illegal. But, you know, I say that to protect my city staff, because city staff, they're not gonna bring something to the table that will be illegal. But me and my colleagues, we might be able to do. So I say the importance of this is reality versus what it is that we have the ability to do.
Okay, great.
If I may, and I would underscore what Commissioner Cunningham just said. That's been the goal of staff in working on this, to see what we can do to make this a reality for our community residents who have been impacted. The other thing that it should be noted is that this was a citizen, I'm going to say citizen initiative that was voted on. It wasn't run through the legislature. You couldn't talk to your senator or representative in Lansing to say, here's what my concerns, how can you address them? This was put together by a group of attorneys who are representing the marijuana industry. And the way they crafted the language that the voters voted on and approved was that for the first 24 months that the state was accepting applications, the only licenses that an individual could get if they weren't involved in the industry was for a Class A grower, which was a limited number of plants, or for the micro business. Again, a very limited small number of plants. In order to get the big licenses, to be the processor, to be a retailer, to be a big grower, a Class B or Class C, you had to have your medical marijuana license in place. And the medical marijuana, they were basically protecting the industry from other people coming in and being a competitor. At least that's the way I view it. And so as a result, it's very hard for people to get a start in this industry, at least for the first, until 24 months have passed.
Okay, thank you. So actually, here's a question that we get quite often here at the city. Marijuana, do you spell it with an H or a J? And why is the city spelling it with an H?
I can answer that one. That's an easy question because number one, it's spelled that way under federal law, and it's spelled that way in the Michigan Public Health Code. And that's the way it was spelled in the Medical Marijuana Act that was adopted by the voters in 2008. That's the way it's spelled in the Medical Facilities Licensing Act, which permits the medical provisioning centers and those commercial enterprises. So as to be consistent, it's spelled with an H throughout. And it is an appropriate spelling. It's not misspelled. And the more common one is with the J, but that's the way the law, all the other legal statutes spell it. And so as to be consistent, that's why we use it in our ordinance, and that's why other state statutes use it, that spelling.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to get that out there. I know we actually had a fair number of questions coming in on Facebook regarding that. Going back to social equity, we had a question that came in from Jay, an email. Are we going to be monitoring the hiring practices of the businesses that come into the city for recreational marijuana?
Thanks, Darla. I'm going to turn this one over to you again.
That all depends on what we approve in our let me start all over. That all depends on what we approve with our social equity plan. We have, as the only hiring requirements we have is if a person receives a percentage, is in some kind of agreement with the city. But if, we didn't hear a lot of it, well, let me say this. One of the issues with hiring folks that we have to remember is that there's some legalities against who can and cannot be hired to work in the facility. So it just depends. So at this point, I'm not trying to evade the question. We just don't have it in there as of yet.
But there will be, or let me start over again. We are considering that with each renewal. So when there are licensing requirements, and those are going to be required to be renewed annually. And that also means there's going to be some verification of, what has been followed. And since the state requires that each individual business have their own social equity plan for their business, we have the ability to have reports or report out of what was done. So we do have some ability, we should have some ability to check what was done over the last year prior to the next year's license renewal.
Right, but it might not be employment. It might not be employment, but everyone has to have a social equity plan. Those things we have to verify on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So is that recreational or recreational and medical?
Just recreational.
Well, let me answer that to some degree. We do have there's only social equity plans are only required for adult use. That's under state law and state regulation. We do have a component of that on the medical side, but we have to be very careful, as been mentioned, that if we are discriminating against non-residents, say we want you to hire locally, but if we have some hard and fast rules that require people or businesses to hire Kalamazoo residents, that invites a whole multitude of legal problems for the city and for those businesses. There's some federal constitutional prohibitions, privileges and immunity clause, commerce clause, equal protection, that preclude you or the city from requiring somebody to discriminate against non-residents. So we have to be a little careful about that.
Thanks. And actually along that same line, we had another question that came in from email that says, does the city of Kalamazoo have a plan of any kind, or does the city of Kalamazoo plan any kind of protections against large outside businesses using funding or management contracts to effectively gain ownership of space intended for local ownership?
That is, again, a problem that plagued actually Grand Rapids. They had a local plan that was really aimed at seeing what they could do to encourage local resident ownership on the medical side. And what they discovered is that people were gaming the system by hiring local people as kind of the front man for the business. And there was a lot of non-residents who were the money behind it. And that's something that really is hard to get at in terms of addressing that problem. So that is certainly a possibility that could take place.
So what we have tried to do is that any benefit in reduction of the distance requirements or any benefits as it relates to getting your license fee reduced, the majority of the ownership of the business needs to be someone who is a city resident from one of our designated shared prosperity census tracts, which are 1, 9, 10, 2.02, and 3 are the ones that we're using. So a majority of the business needs to be someone who is a city resident in one of those census tracts for the last 3 years, or is a city resident who has been convicted of a
Marijuana related.
distribution of a controlled substance, not to a minor. But those, the majority of the business needs to be owned by someone who meets one of those two. So as a way to ensure that it's a majority partner and not just, anyone who can come in and say, this person's local. How do we, where's our benefit?
Okay. So we had another question that came in from David C. on email, asking about, are there any loans available for less fortunate individuals who want to get into the marijuana industry?
Dorla.
Excuse me. We have not set up a specific loan program for supportive entry into the business from the city. We've had some conversations about how we could financially support, but at this time, no decisions have been made about how to use our funding in regards to entry into the business.
Thank you, Director Bonner. One thing to keep in mind is that every particular detail, like for example, what might be the participation of our economic development department of the city, which does work with small businesses, those won't necessarily, all those items won't necessarily be included in our licensing ordinance or our zoning ordinance, but all are items for thoughtful consideration for policy actions and how we approach this kind of thing. So I just have a question here because I know it's a little after 7. I know we figured we could go a while longer. We also have an individual on our team here who is a devotee of lifelong learning and a student, and she leads by example. So Director Bonner does have a class, online class to go to here in about 15 minutes. Is that right? Or sooner? And
I told them I could be 15 minutes late.
Okay, so it started at 7 then. All right. So you are allowed to enter your class late. I don't want you getting demerits there. I don't want the, I want you to get the A that you're aiming for. So I don't want you have to do extra credit to make up for it. But so that all said, I have, the way this is working, I've gotten some questions that have come in to my email accounts. And I'm looking at a great set of questions that have come out of one of the organizers, one of the lead people in one of our neighborhood associations. So there's 9 great questions there. And so I just forwarded those to you, Jeff. I don't know how many more people we have queued up here, but I'm even looking at this list. I can see we probably will not be able to answer all of those questions tonight. So what's our plan going to be for questions we can't get to, other things that are coming in via email, that sort of thing, Christina?
Sure. So anything that we are unable to answer before we have to sign off this evening, staff will take and answer for posting online early next week. And we will post those again at kalamazoocity.org/adult use marijuana. And that way everybody can see what everybody else asked and how they were answered for more information.
So Jeff, as far as the list, how many folks do we have at this point? Or can you tell how many folks have questions they would like to ask? And maybe some of those questions would be more helpful to attempt to answer in a venue like this. Maybe some of those questions can just be, answered with a simple, email response, that sort of thing.
Right. So we've got at least a dozen or so here, but number of them are similar to each other. So
Okay.
we're looking at them, and we have received a number of questions regarding zoning and where these can be located. One of the questions that we received from Richard from social media is, can residents prevent a marijuana business from opening in their neighborhood or in certain area?
Sure. So I'll start on that one, and maybe Clyde can jump in. So if a use is listed in the zoning code as permitted in a location, then it is a permitted use. And it's not something that can be prevented from opening through other means. So if someone is concerned, if Richard or anyone else is concerned about locations, to giving your questions today, giving questions and comments for Plan Commission where we review where uses should be listed as permitted and with what standards is the best venue for that. And that's true of not just marijuana uses, that's true for all uses. If a use is permitted and doesn't need additional approvals or permissions, as long as you are turning in, as long as you can meet your site plan requirements, as long as you can meet any building code requirements, then that use can move forward.
So another question that we got regarding specific uses is that there are two new types of businesses that the state of Michigan does allow that are not being considered here in the city of Kalamazoo. And why is that?
Sure. So those two, a correction, they're not being considered for the zoning code. I think that the city commission may still consider them, but they're not the types of establishments or uses that you would incorporate into a zoning code. So those two have to do with event licenses and the ability to hold an event. And those are obviously marijuana focused events. And so there are two licenses. One is the ability to hold a license that allows you to organize events. And the second would be a temporary license to have an event. And you have to have the first one in order to get the second one. And so that is something that the city commission will consider when they look at their licensing, or is on the table to consider when they do review the licensing requirements. But it's not something that we would include in the zoning ordinance itself.
Okay. Another location-based question that came in from Ashley on email. How is Kalamazoo going to ensure that marijuana retailers will not be disproportionately concentrated in marginalized neighborhoods in the city?
Sure. So I'll start on that one again, since it's zoning. There are a couple of ways. So one is that we talked a little bit about this earlier, looked at allowing a wide variety of the marijuana businesses in a wide variety of locations. So it's not just one district that could result in one location, but allowing them at multiple locations. The second way we have thought about making sure that they're not clustered is by having distances between them, specifically for retailers, so where the product is sold, and micro businesses, which is also on a smaller scale where marijuana product can be sold. And so we incorporated into the code as currently proposed, and also following what we did for medical marijuana provisioning centers, 1,000 feet between retailers, and there is a distance of 500 feet between micro businesses. So two things kind of spread them out. One is making sure that they're allowed in more than one zoning district. And then the second is putting some space in between them to make sure they're not clustering.
Hey, Christina.
Go ahead,
Can I
Commissioner
add
Credo.
something as well? We won't probably have time to answer this here tonight, but if we do the follow-up with questions, I was just wondering if it'd be possible to just kind of spell out a little bit the acronyms that we see for zoning, and then just maybe a more in-depth explanation of what each zoning type focuses on. For instance, for retail, we have community commercial, so you'll see that as CC. LW1 is live work 1. CCBD, that's Commercial Central Business District. So that's on the retail side. But then on the micro business, you've got CC again, you got LW, but it's 2 this time. You've got CCBD, and then both of the manufacturing zoning districts. So I think it might be really helpful for people to, better understand what each of those are.
Sure.
Maybe.
I think that's a little involved for what we have this evening, but what I can say is that in preparing the Plan Commission staff report for review next week, we did that. And so we took each one and talked about, how is it similar to other uses that we already have in our code? And how did we think about why we allowed it in certain districts? And what does it relate to? So that will be posted publicly. It's supposed to be going up tonight, so it'll be available tonight, but we can also cut and paste that section and put it in the questions, because it kind of talks about the rationale.
Awesome, thank you.
Another zoning type question that we've got as far as the number of potential establishments in the city, we've gotten from a couple of different individuals, can be summarized as, are the new regulations going to put a cap on the number of businesses in the city of Kalamazoo, or are the new regulations going to specify a certain number of businesses per neighborhood?
Sure, so I'll start, and then please, if everyone could chime in. Mayor Anderson mentioned that when medical marijuana was put in place, that there was a consideration for, do we put a total number, or do we regulate them by creating areas where they're not permitted and spacing in between? And the city chose the second of those 2 options, and we're following that again for adult use marijuana. So there will not be a total number of licenses given or a cap. What will determine the number, and I think this question is most commonly associated with retailers, not so much some of the other businesses. What will kind of determine that number is some of the spacing requirements. So what we have done is said, we're going to propose it in these zoning districts. So we could look at a map and say, okay, let's start with these zoning districts and where they're mapped. And then we start to apply the standards. So the distance from schools, the distance from state licensed daycares, and that takes away some area. Then we look at the required distance between retailers, which is 1,000 feet. And so that takes, you can estimate how many might be allowed in an area, but it's an estimation, right? Because if the first person goes in smack dab in the middle, that's going to determine where the next person can be because of that 1,000-foot difference. And so as we move through the zoning ordinance creation process, and those parameters become more firm after the Plan Commission discusses and reviews them, we could start to estimate how many might be allowed if everything was perfect. But again, kind of depends on who, what property you have or are able to purchase. The first person to have the license from the state goes in, and then everybody else has to go accordingly. And again, that's the same process that we followed with medical and created kind of the natural boundaries with each.
Okay.
I'll follow up on that. It was a conscious decision because those communities that went through some type of decision matrix and determined winners and losers who got licenses, they ended up in court because the people who didn't get licenses attacked the system as either being flawed, or it was not fairly administered, or their application wasn't scored appropriately. And we wanted to avoid that on the medical side, which we were able to do. However, again, the industry didn't like that. And so the statute that Michigan voters approved said that if a municipality seeks to limit number of businesses, which they can do, but if they do so, and there are more applicants than there are spaces available, then the municipality has to develop what is called a competitive process that's designed to select those applicants who are best suited to operate in compliance with the act. Now, that is legal jargon that basically says, go ahead and do this, cities, and then be sued.
Great, thank you. So the short answer is the proposed regulations do not have a cap, but there are regulations as far as where they can locate, distance from schools and things along those lines. And okay, the next question is regarding the use of marijuana. Can employers still make personnel decisions based on personal marijuana use by employees?
Yes, they can. Again, what was approved by the voters did not require employers to accommodate marijuana use by their employees. If you have a zero tolerant drug policy, then that is acceptable.
Okay, great. Another question that came in on email was, will delivery be available for residents who are unable to easily get to provision centers?
So I think the answer to that is yes, as long as that's what the state allows. Is that correct, Clyde?
Yes.
Okay.
Shortest answer Clyde's ever given to anything.
Okay. Another general question that we got in from Steve in the email is, why are there no representatives from the marijuana industry on this panel tonight?
Commissioner Cunningham, do you want to talk about this one?
So one of the things that I really want to highlight here is the content experts. A lot of them right now are the individuals in the city. It's intriguing to see on a state, let me rephrase, a local, state, and then a national level, how many experts are in the room and how different those ideologies can be based upon, perception. Because it's such a new industry, even our expert, Clyde, who's specifically a leader in the medical side, it's just not much litigation in regards to it. It's not much context in regards to law in regards to it. So I say, first of all, this specific forum was just a way for the city and the city staff, city commission and the city staff to really communicate out to the community and ask for your input. So if you have those, as the mayor mentioned earlier, if you have those thoughts, those concerns and things of that nature, please convey them. And then, like I said, all of this is really embodied around the city ordinance. So most of the questions that you ask, city staff should be able to answer because they are the content experts. And then also, this is really formulated around just the city of Kalamazoo's ordinance around zoning and social equity.
Okay, great. Another question that we got regarding regulations from Sandy by email was, why is the city proposing lesser restrictions on recreational marijuana than what was put on medical marijuana?
So I'll start with that one. Thanks, Jeff and Sandy. So I think Clyde touched on this earlier. There are medical marijuana and adult use marijuana are regulated at the state level with two different sets of ordinances that were created differently, one through a voter initiative and one not, and they are set up differently. And that includes when medical marijuana act was passed at the state, it listed a wide variety of uses that a city could choose to create a buffer from, or could do a buffer from. When medical marijuana act was passed, that was not, the wide range was not included. It was a focus on K through 12 schools, grades K through 12, and that was their focus. So, it has to do with the difference between what we're currently proposing has to do with the difference between the state acts and what they were recommending.
And let me also speak to one, I think that was a perfect answer is, different guidelines for different industries. And So that kind of provides the thought and the context behind it. But I also want to add into it, you know, when the medical came out, some of the line of thinkings in regards to my colleagues and us accepting this in our community is with the idea that when medical came out, there was the idea that recreational might be soon to follow. So what does this look like as a step one towards recreational? Now that recreational is out, we also have to keep in context, you know, the state allowed us to kind of opt out of some of this, but in reality, you know, future expectation is this will probably be maybe an initiative on a federal level that opens the door even further. So, you know, I think this ordinance really allows us to be intentional on what this looks like in our community. And with that being said, you know, what kind of guidelines do we want to be in place? So I think it highlights the need for us to take a slow approach to opting in, for which you see the extra 6 or 7 months added in regards to us making this decision. But it also highlights the fact that we have to think about this in the future context too, as me and my colleagues.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Another question that we got in from John on email was, in the development of these new regulations, was the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety involved in the writing of them? And if so, how?
Repeat that question, I'm so sorry.
Was the Department of Public Safety involved in writing and reviewing these proposed regulations?
So we indirectly, I would say, they have been involved. Assistant Chief Boyson and myself participated in Commissioner Cunningham's panel at the Douglas Community Center back in February, where we were along with a large number of residents, as well as some industry folks, to discuss the different rules that exist out there, what the city could consider, what have been the impacts of the medical industry already being within the city, and any impact on crime that the city may or may not have seen since then, and information from that panel discussion certainly impacted what went into the ordinance itself.
I would point out that when we did the medical, again, public safety personnel, particularly Chief Boyson, was involved. And that's because the statute that was the legislature adopted had a role for local police agencies to play. When the industry decided to craft a statute that the voters approved, that role for local police involvement was diminished substantially. And so, and the fact that because the medical was new, I think our public safety department has got a pretty good grasp on what's going on. They're keeping their eye on things, but there has not been a desire or a need for them to be at the table on the adult use side. But we are keeping them informed. Christine is very correct. They've been indirectly involved.
Commissioner Cunningham, did you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. One of the things I actually want to highlight in this space is that our chief and our management in our policing, they're excited for this opportunity, for this to be legal in our community, so that they don't have to police it in the degree that they were mandated to in previous years. So hopefully, you know, let me rephrase, they will be integral if in the end thought of us agreeing to or disagreeing to allowing recreational marijuana in our community. And so I think it is very imperative that they have insight, just because they understand what it looks like and what it feels like and what it is to police it from their side of the spectrum. And I think that's a very valuable lens to taken into accommodation in every component, whether it's zoning or just the recreational piece itself.
Okay. Jeff, do you have we're getting close to our 90-minute time here, and I know there's probably going to be a lot more questions. Do you have one final kind of wrap-up question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I think this is a really great one. It came in from Facebook here just recently. What can individual citizens do to kind of help move this process along?
Mayor Anderson, would you like to take this one?
Sure, I'll get started on it, but Commissioner Praedel, is there anything in particular you'd like to say related to this? Not necessarily. Okay,
no,
so exactly what you are doing this evening. So we need active community participation. So I'm sure that it has been edifying for folks watching this and looking at the range of questions that on one hand, we have a community that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, has 3 times demonstrated and maybe it's 4 times that there is a majority support for marijuana being a legal business in the city. That is demonstrated in this, how folks voted in the city of Kalamazoo as it relates to adult use, as it relates to medical, as it relates to the idea of it being the lowest priority enforcement. And I think there was another ordinance related to the idea of establishing 3 dispensaries in the city. So I think that's 4 times, is that right, Clyde? So we have that.
All right.
And in addition, you can see there are people asking, why are you delaying? Why are you holding up? You could have done this 6 months ago. Why are you dragging your feet? On the other hand, we have people who also live in Kalamazoo who are concerned about, what is this going to mean? Well, this is not clear to us. This is a new thing. What's it going to mean for my neighborhood? What's it going to mean for the church I go to or the daycare center where I take my kids? What's that going to look like? So we are answering our question here about why have we taken some months, as Commissioner Cunningham has talked about, community engagement. This is community engagement, social equity, that sort of thing. So we are looking for thoughtful input to inform the ordinances that we're moving forward. Not just live with our questions here, but take advantage of the opportunity to send your emails, call, leave voicemails related to further thoughts and concerns. I hate to say this, I mean, it's a self-imposed deadline for June. We are shooting for that, but if we get a lot of feedback here that seems to indicate we need to adjust some things, that's why we're doing this. I don't know if that helps or not, but community input front and center on what we're doing.
And so the next big opportunity is Wednesday, right? For those that are interested in supporting and help pushing it forward is coming. I guess you can't come. You can virtually attend the Plan Commission meeting on Wednesday, the 15th. It's at 7 p.m. and it'll be done through Zoom, and we'll have that information out pretty quickly, so you know exactly where to sign in. But that would be a great opportunity to voice support and come and ask questions, whatever you need to do, concerns.
Thank you so much. So at this point, just because the time is getting close to the end here, I want to let people know that I presume other folks, I see, I'll give you a moment, have maybe gotten questions to their own email accounts that didn't get asked. All those are being forwarded on. I've already sent some I've gotten here to Jeff, so we'll have those to answer. And the next thing I want to do is I do want to thank Director Bonner, who did leave for her class, City Planner Anderson, and City Attorney Robinson. So before I do the final wrap up here, I just want to give the commissioners who are present an opportunity to for their final thoughts. Commissioner Cunningham?
I just wanted to double back and say thank you to all of those who watched this town hall. Thank you to all of those who sent text messages, emails, inboxes, Facebook notes, things of that nature. I know I was looking down quite a bit and somebody said, don't fall asleep. I was responding to a lot of people on my phone, but I say that to say all of those questions, inquiries, or statements that you have made, I will double back to ensure that city staff responds to them, or at least have that on their radar. I wanted to send another special thanks to Banks and Company for doing the amazing work that you did in the background to assist me with organizing a forum within like a 3-day span. And also I want to communicate to all of those potential business owners in the community. This is you need to act now. This ordinance will be coming around the corner relatively quick. So if there's some type of investment that you would want to be a part of, please reach out. You can reach out to me at commissionerericunningham@gmail.com. Find me on social media, Facebook, and I'll put you in contact with the right individuals in the community who are also investing and or advising. So if you have any other questions, once again, reach out to me, commissionerericunningham@gmail, or on social media, Facebook primarily.
Thanks for your great work, Commissioner. Commissioner Praedel?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Just want to thank everybody who's tuning in from home or who will watch this recording later on as well. And please make sure to note to people who couldn't make it tonight, who want to watch later, that it's recorded and will be on our YouTube and I believe archived, so you can still watch it on Facebook as well. And then just stay tuned as well for next week early on our city site to check out the questions that remain and some answers to some questions people might have lingering. But one thing I wanted to just share is, I guess with a crisis going on, there may be some people out there who are thinking, well, what are you doing talking about marijuana when, our family is going through a crisis, our community, our world's going through a crisis? And I would say to that, that if there is ever a group of leaders and staff and a commission that can juggle both things, it's this commission and it's this city staff. They are working tirelessly around the clock to make sure that they are thinking of every aspect of this crisis and serving this community. But the reality is like Mayor Anderson said, the business of this community still has to go on, because at some point this crisis will end, and these important monumental policy issues that we've got to tackle will have to happen. And so we can juggle two things at once, and it's so important, I think, for the community to see that that we're doing well, and that we can juggle this, and that we can handle this and keep the ball moving. The second one is that you often hear from a number of other people, not just in our community but around the country right now, where people express concern about how different levels of government can use this crisis as a crutch to say, well, we can't take public comment, or we won't be able to listen on this issue, or we're going to use the emergency powers to kind of push things through. And this is a prime example of where city staff and this commission and certainly Mayor Anderson, are being proactive in this and really using this opportunity while many of us are still at home to provide mediums that we normally wouldn't have had. There's a number of people who can't make it to city, commission chambers to come for a forum or for an input session. And so how cool is it that we get to be, I'm in my kid's future nursery with dinosaurs behind me. And how cool is it that we can be in our home and we can have this conversation? We can let you dialogue with us and ask questions, and then we can respond in real time. It's a really cool opportunity for us, and I'm excited that we're moving forward, and I'm excited that we're still doing our due diligence to collect that input and be visible and present during this crisis. So just wanted to share that. Hope everybody continues to take care and do well, and please just continue to think of your family and your neighbors, and just keep kindness at the forefront of everything that we're doing.
Very important thoughts, Commissioner Praedel. I appreciate that. So one thing I want to say about this town hall approach, I'd be interested to hear any feedback, positive or negative, on how this works for you, if this is helpful. We are actually planning more town halls, and maybe be a different set of faces on those, so we can keep commissioners doing the different work here. And this isn't the only issue we need to keep working on while we're dealing with this horrible virus here in our community. And that leads to just how I want to wrap up a little bit. How I started is that back to this idea of flattening the curve. We are lucky that there has not been an explosion of identified cases, although I guess in some ways you were not going to know about it. We're not getting a lot of testing done yet. But that said, there do not seem to be a great number of cases in Kalamazoo County at this point. And I think that's in large measure due to being careful and attempting to comply with this idea of social distancing. But along those lines, I'm going to ask in a nice way, and that is this: there are still individuals who are gathering. I know we're social people. We like to spend time together, but there's still groups of people that are getting together and spending a lot of time, interacting in kind of a face-to-face way, and doing that in some larger gatherings. And I just want to remind folks that that's still unwise. And maybe you feel healthy, and maybe you don't think anybody around you is sick, but you can be a carrier and not have symptoms. And all of us interact with each other in a way. I mean, who are we going to see next in that evening or the next day? We're going to see our grandmother. Are we going to see other folks who might have more compromised health situations? And we certainly do not want to contribute to that. So I'm asking each and every one of us here in the city just to really reflect that to each other. Hey, stand 6 feet away, raise your voice a little bit. You can still interact. Let's please here. Now it's for the month of April. Now that the governor has extended that time period, let's do the best job we can. We don't need to have our public safety department running around and reminding people, that's what we're hoping they'll do. I think each and every person can demonstrate that responsibility, be an example for each other. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone who participated. I love you, Kalamazoo. This meeting's adjourned.